we have a special guest, Dr. Jen.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing today?
Good. I wish it was sunny, but it's pouring rain. Can't have sunny days every day.
So this is exciting. We had a first ever Mobility's Guide to Better Living.
Nice.
It was a good event. I mean, we had a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. We had people on the floor crawling around reception.
It was good.
It's pretty cool.
So, and you've been traveling, man. I mean, tell us about
I've
the
been
book.
traveling around a little
What's going
bit.
on?
Yeah, we had a nice launch here a month ago, and then been to New York since then, and Edmonton last weekend, and then we're heading down to Paleo FX, the big paleo conference in Austin, this week. So hopefully have some good stories for you when we get back.
I look at it in terms of all the places you're going, and he's only going to the hipster joints. You've been to Brooklyn, you've been to Austin. Come on.
Where do you put Edmonton?
Come on. Hey, I love Edmonton, don't get me wrong.
You're not one of those guys who carries his old kettlebell on the plane. You're not one of those, are
I
you?
do have some colleagues who carry their own coffee plunger devices to ensure the optimal flow of their French press. So I haven't quite got to that level yet. So
Okay.
we're safe.
So this is exciting. So I figured that you guys are experts when it comes to supplements to some extent, and maybe I'm going to ask you some of the questions that we had some of the patients and some of the people who showed up to the mobility event had to ask. So I know there's a lot of variability that exists, but for an average person, if they're eating well, do they need to take any supplements or not?
Well, I mean, I think diet's always going to be the foundation for everything. We want to make sure we're developing good habits and getting the right foods in. So we always want to start with that as our foundation. One of the reasons why I think a paleo foundation is the way to go, but making sure we get all those nutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential amino acids and fats, etc. in. And then it just really, it's in terms of the individual, depending on what you're doing. Exactly. We live in Toronto here, 6 months of the year it's pretty cold, so there's greater stresses and demands in the body. So I think that's when you kind of put things into place that they might be missing or need more of, right? I don't know what your take is, Jenna.
Well, I think supplements are exactly what they say there. They're to supplement a good diet and active lifestyle, and then based on individual needs. So what a really active CrossFitter would need would be really different than what a child or a pregnant woman would need. So we really have to interpret it as based on what the individual's needs are.
I find that's always tricky because most people want to have that, is it good for me or is it bad for me?
Yeah.
Give me the black and white answer, and it's really like the same supplement, 3 different people, 4 different people, you have totally different benefits or even whether they need it or not.
So let's see if we can get a consensus here. What do we feel about fats? How do we feel about good fats? Yay or nay?
Yay.
I think that's a loaded question. How do I feel about good fats? I feel pretty good about good fats.
So tell us a little bit about that in terms of, I think, especially with cholesterol and fats getting a bad rep.
Well, I think the tide has swung over now where people are starting to realize that things like cholesterol and, whether you're eating butter or animal fats, that cholesterol isn't really the be-all and end-all. Although it's troubling because now we're actually getting people to eat all these nutrient-dense foods and the ones that we've been trying to get them to eat for so long, and we still see, a week or two ago here in our national newspaper in Canada, the Globe and Mail, they ran a study which was an observational study, so not a lot of scientific merit there, which told us that people who ate more than 2 eggs, if they were diabetic, had greater chances, 69% increased risk of cardiovascular disease, which sounds staggering.
Yeah.
But again, it's an observational study. It doesn't tell you if those people were eating the rest of the lumberjack breakfast with the pancakes, the eggs, the orange juice, whether they were unfit, all these types of things.
And they were also diabetic?
In this observational study, they were diabetic. But it's almost like saying I'm wearing a blue shirt, so I think the Raptors will win tonight, so I'll just keep wearing a blue shirt and they'll always win.
Yeah.
So these things get the press, but recently a randomized control trial, which is the gold standard, came out with diabetics and showed that egg consumption all the way up to 5 or 6 eggs per person had no impact on cardiovascular disease. So no wonder everyone's confused because there's getting these headlines that are trying to sway us in a certain direction, but when you look at the research, it's still pretty clear. So don't be afraid of your eggs.
And I think it's one of those things where you look, your body's not sitting there making cholesterol to try and kill you. Your body wants to keep you alive. So it's not going to really force you to have an earlier death sentence, essentially.
And it's always amazing that we can think of, and I get people who say, well, is it dangerous to eat 3 or 4 eggs? but we never get that question on terms of the muesli or the cookie down at your favorite coffee shop or whatever else like that. We sort of have, and we just say, well, you know, that's a nice treat. So why would we think that something natural is that dangerous for us? It's crazy, right?
And you know what I say? I say like, look, that's the building block for life. Everything you want is in the egg. It can't be that bad. You know what I mean? So it's I think that you're right. But like anything else, there's a lot of variability that exists, right? You know, but I think overall, I think people need to be less scared of fats. I think we started to realize like how much we need it for pretty much every process in ourselves, right?
For sure, and I'm sure you see this a lot, Jen, as well. With the people who come in complaining of sugar cravings and not being able to kick the carb cravings and everything else, inevitably you tend to find out that they're following a low-calorie diet and inevitably then a low-fat diet. And all you do is add more fats into their diet, and all of a sudden they're amazed at how sugar cravings are gone and more satiated between meals. So that's kind of a big step for a lot of people too, because we think more calories equals more body weight, but not always the case.
Well, and I use fat a lot of the times for when people come in with hormone imbalances. Something so simple as getting them to eat more fats can really balance them out in the long run. And people will come in looking for a pill to pop, and as soon as you're like, I want you to have a tablespoon of ghee or grass-fed butter, and they throw up their hands and go, oh, wait a second.
For sure, and I mean, I think that's where you see so much supplementation around weight loss. And while it can perhaps provide a little bit of a boost, I mean, nothing's going to do nearly as much as just diet and exercise. I mean, those are like the home runs every single time. Although it is, you know, people want to kind of feel like they're getting a little extra boost, but as long as you're doing the other things, you can add that in. But if you're just trying to, you know, take a supplement to lose weight, then you're, in the long run, unfortunately, there is no free lunch. It's not going to happen.
So now, that was awesome. So now let's talk about carbohydrates, because I think a lot of people are just going to the low carb diet. Not true.
Both trying maybe.
We need carbs. Now I know I'm going to get into gluten, but let's just talk about that. And I think like in terms of weight loss, everybody goes on a low carb diet. I do think that you need to be able to have a limited, to some extent, good carbohydrates in your system. It's good for at least like, you know, what day-to-day life.
For sure. I mean, it really depends on the individual. I mean, look, this is a real difference between sexes here with males and females, because we can see that in men we can get away with low carb diets, even very low carb diets, for quite a long time, and not have too many disturbances in terms of recovery and sleep and things like that. Whereas in females we have to be a little bit more strategic in the way that we do things, because it can tax, you know, the hormonal system's a bit more complex, and it can tax things a little bit more. So we do have to kind of, you know, have days that are higher and days that are lower, perhaps. But you're right in a sense. If you get somebody who's lean, I mean, we can fill them up with carbohydrates, and they're going to stay at 8% body fat and use those for fuel and replace muscle glycogen. I mean, it really kind of depends, right?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to what carbs are you talking about? Are you talking about that cookie at the coffee shop or an apple? And I'd rather see people eating that apple than a cookie at the coffee shop, or even some of the lower carb versions of the cookies. Pick the real food and not the masterminded, lab-created food.
I think one of the things that I see is that people have a very extreme binary approach, and they go on a really low carb diet, and they're not able, like, they lose a lot of weight, but then they're not able to sustain it, and then they go back, and then they gain the weight, and it just becomes a problem. So you really want to be able to, again, put it in terms of like, hey, am I going to sort of be able to sustain this and maintain it for a long period of time? And your body's going to adapt to it much better. Agreed? Is that?
For sure. I mean, even different body types too. Like if you get more like an endomorph body type, which is, you know, sort of like your rugby players or, you know, linemen in football and stuff like that, they can get away with following perhaps a more lower carb approach and not getting the hunger pangs. Whereas if you take, you know, the runner or the ectomorph, who's tall and lean and thin and high metabolism, then that person can kind of burn out a little bit. Although it depends what your buy-in is. I have ultramarathon runners who run for 24 hours on less than 100 grams of carbs per day. And if you can, you know, if you can take that 2 weeks and convert yourself over to fat burning, it can be tremendous. But like you said, if we're kind of dipping in and out, and you know, we're trying to get through our busy days and everything else, then you can kind of get yourself run down.
But you know what? I think outliers, they get a lot of attention because they're able to do amazing things. But I think part of it is like, at least three of us, we are clinicians. We see, like, you know, basically the stuff that people have to work with on a day-to-day, right? So I think it's a much different sort of
The biggest thing too on diet is people tend to buy in and think that they have to eat, let's say we put them on a very low carb diet, then they think that from here and forevermore, it's 50 grams of carbs.
Yeah.
Right? It's got to always be that way. Whereas you can say, you know what, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we're going to do this. The other days, you can kind of back off a little bit and do what you want.
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool because you get a limited buy-in, but the person actually gets pretty nice benefit. And then you tend to notice on the other days where they're allowed to eat more other stuff, that all of a sudden it sort of titrates down and they're eating cleaner. So yeah, you definitely, you said you got to get that individualized approach and then run with it.
Okay, I'm excited. I got 2 naturopaths. Gluten. Do you guys just hate?
I personally hate it because I have celiac disease,
Okay,
so that
all right.
induces an autoimmune condition in my body. So I personally hate it.
Okay.
For patients, I think it's really important before taking note of actually screening for those diseases.
For sure.
So there's a lot of great lab tests that we can run to make sure that we're not taking it out and ignoring a possible condition that they may have that's making it hard for them.
For sure, and the biggest thing around the gluten thing is we've all these companies have jumped in, and rather than having gluten bread, we're having non-gluten bread. Whereas if we're going to go gluten-free, the whole idea is to eat stuff that's growing from the ground anyway, so we do our best to minimize. And for sure, there's going to be a part of the population that can have a little bit, but I mean, people don't realize they're having toast for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, the pasta for dinner, over and over. They've got the aches, the inflammation, the digestive concern, and you say, okay, well, let's start reducing some of those confounders, some of those things that might be causing the problem, and then kind of go from there. But it's definitely one of those things that's jumped up in everyone's on the blogs and articles. But they did have their first randomized control trial this fall. I know all the docs out there are always banging on about lack of randomized control trials. First randomized control trial for gluten consumption. Those who did have the gluten, more gas, more bloating, more abdominal discomfort. Booyah.
I just love the fact that he keeps looking at me and he's like, all right, okay. So this is awesome. So and you know what? Subtractive therapy. Take it out. See how you feel. Like I think like to me that's personalized medicine. You know what I mean? Just like I mean I love the RCTs, but sometimes like what does it matter? N equals 1. How it affects you as a person. So to me that's the key thing. All right. So let's finish up. What is the most underrated and overrated supplement? Ooh.
Oh, that's a hard question.
That's a hard one.
I want to say overrated are like probiotics in things. So the yogurts and all of those sort of laboratory created probiotics that people come in and tell me they're taking Activia as their supplement, and I have to control my eye roll oftentimes. So I think that's one of the overrated ones where we're adding it into food stuff and calling it a supplemental food.
Yeah, I mean you get that with even these phytosterols, which are healthy plant sterols, and we're putting them in margarines now to offset the bad thing from the margarine.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, why don't we just not have that in the first place, right? I think overhyped too. I have to get back to the whole weight loss thing. We're in springtime, people are coming in, want to look better, lose weight. And this quote unquote fat burning supplements. I mean, the secret ingredient to all of those is caffeine.
It's caffeine.
If you really want to take a supplement, you can spend $8 and get a whole bottle of caffeine pills, or you can spend $40 and get a kind of something with all the bells and whistles on it. But or you can be just like yourself, myself, grab your cup of coffee and tastes great. And you're
Butter coffee.
Put some butter in it.
Butter
Yeah,
coffee.
there you go.
Embrace the fat.
You just go for it, right?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think vitamin D.
You're vitamin D guy. Hey, vitamin D.
Hey,
What's
listen,
wrong? Vitamin D is
honestly,
low.
like you know what? I think why not, right? It's what do you got to lose, right?
For sure. I mean, there's definitely a range that you want to keep people in. And I think for some people, even they always assume in the summertime that they're fine because they're getting lots of sun. But if there is signs and symptoms of deficiency, then getting tested in July or August is pretty nice because if you actually come out low, if there's any inflammatory processes, it can really drive down vitamin D levels. So you might not realize it, but the guy who plays golf all the time, or people who are out in the garden and stuff like that, they're getting their vitamin D. But that would be a nice way to evaluate.
Doing proper skin protection, they're putting sunscreen on, so that's blocking its production. Its production anyways. They're not getting that full benefit from the sun.
And again, people throw their hands up in the air because they're like, "You told me to put sunscreen on, now you're telling me to take it off with vitamin D." Maybe just one arm with the other arm.
I love that. Look, I think there's a lot of information out there. I think it's confusing. So if you guys have specific needs or issues, come and see these guys. They know what they're talking about. So I'm going to give you the last word here. Women's needs. Is there something specifically that you think that?
I encourage a lot more women to do hormone testing earlier because we're seeing a lot of hormone imbalances starting quite young, and I see a lot of people not even telling you they're on things like the birth control pill that can cause a lot of nutritional imbalances. Vitamin D for one, B vitamins. And so I think we have to take a different assessment approach just based on what their history is.
You want to add anything, Gar?
I think that's a great answer. I think if you guys have any more questions, you can tweet at Jen. What's your Twitter
At
handle?
Newell ND.
At Newell ND. You can tweet at me at Dr. Bubbs, and you could also.
Hell no.
You
I'm not
gotta
on
get,
Twitter.
you gotta
Ain't
get
gonna
Dr. T
happen.
on Twitter here.
I want to
Hashtag Dr. T on Twitter.
I really want to see you with your hipster beard, man. I want you to
I'm
grow
coming
that.
in next week. Hipster beard.
All right. Well, listen, have a safe trip. Thank you for being
Thank you.
on this episode. I think it was fun. I had fun. You guys had fun?
Good time.
All right. I hope that was useful, guys. Bye.